Okay, now we all hold the police to a certain standard, and we all look to the police to protect and serve. When you check this out here that I'm about to play, right? You're going to see how it's hard to trust the police. How these officers took advantage of the position to protect their community. And this is in Mississippi now. Racism still exists. These people were upset that black people lived in this county, and they felt that there shouldn't be any black people in this county. So they took it upon themselves to stage a home raid as police and torture these two black people, sticking dildos in them, even shot one and assaulted them. You supposed to be able to trust the police, man. And in this situation here, it's real sad that at this day and age that racism still exists to that level in this area. When in certain situations, when the law wants to crack down, they'll crack down. Why isn't this something that is under control at this point in life? Do they really want to have it under control? Do they really care? And they said at first it was nothing about to be done about this until some pressure came down the pipeline and it was forced to make something happen. And these same officers had another situation with another black guy, and the guy died. And I guess they're going to reopen that case in that situation. But I'm going to let y'all hear from this Democracy Now! When they interviewed the guys and they talked about the situation, man. It's real messed up that these people went through that because they were black. It's messed up, man. But check this out, man.
A warning to our audience, this next segment contains descriptions and images of police violence. We turn now to Mississippi, where 6 white former police officers who called themselves the Goon Squad have pleaded guilty to raiding a home and torturing 2 black men earlier this year, after first trying to cover up their actions. Some of the officers face life in prison. On January 24th, court records show the deputies raided a home in Braxton, Mississippi, after a white neighbor of one of the officers called them to complain there were black men staying there. The officer texted the others, quote, "Are y'all available for a mission?" That night, without a warrant, the officers burst into the home, handcuffed, beat, tasered the 2 men, Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker. Also sexually abused them with a sex toy with shouting racial slurs. One of the officers put a gun in Jenkins' mouth for a mock execution and pulled the trigger. The bullet lacerated Jenkins' tongue, broke his jaw, exited through his neck. This is U.S. Attorney Darren LaMarca last week announcing.
Now, for the officer to put a gun in the man's mouth and pull the trigger after he raided the house, they had to have a level of comfortability where they felt that they were above the law and that they could get in no trouble. Wherever it was at in that county, they had a level of no respect for the law, but they were trying to enforce the law. This is what you call a gang. This is a gang right here. And it's a gang that takes advantage of their position. But now that they got caught, I'm sure that they feel sorry for what they did. But while it was going on, they didn't care. They got caught 40 years, 20 years, 17 years. Now they care. But they took advantage of these people, stuck dildos in them, put the gun in the man's mouth and pulled the trigger, trying to kill him because he was black.
Federal charges against the former officers for the attack.
But not only did they brazenly commit these acts, but after inflicting serious bodily injury by firing a shot through one of the victim's mouths, they left him lying in a pool of blood. Gathered on the porch of the house to discuss how to cover it up. What indifference, what disregard for life.
After the attack, Michael Corey Jenkins was actually charged with a felony based on methamphetamine the officers said they found in the raid. But records show that was a lie, and the charge was dropped. In fact,
now, this thing here goes on all across the world. Officers will plant evidence to make their case. It was something that I seen before on Law and Crime, where it was a Pacific officer that wanted to get a rank in the department, in the drug unit, and he was constantly planting things on people. So this kind of stuff happens all across the world. These are the people that's supposed to protect and serve. But when you give people a certain position of power, they tend to abuse it.
in fact, the deputies planted drugs to devise an excuse for the raid and also stole surveillance video from the house. Their body cameras were off. Court documents said the officers used the name Goon Squad, quote, because of their willingness to use excessive force and not to report it. The Associated Press found the deputies were linked to at least 4 violent attacks on black men since 2019. 2 of the men died. For more, we're joined by Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie.
They got a history of this. It said that they did this to at least 4 people, and 2 of them died. Damn. And this is just coming out in this situation? How doesn't the government shut that down? The government can step in on anything else. The government can put tax liens on you, can take things from you. But you can't stop this racism in Mississippi? Racism still exists in Mississippi? Come on, man.
Terrell Parker, as well as Malik Shabazz, a civil rights attorney with Black Lawyers for Justice who's representing them. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Malik, let's begin with you. Can you talk about how this case was exposed, how we saw these officers charged, and what you understand about their background, this not being the first vicious attack?
Okay, thank you for having us on. I want to say before we get started that Michael and Eddie will only be speaking, that they cannot speak about the specific details of what happened in that house that night, but they can talk about their reactions to the guilty verdicts and to their pain and suffering. And Michael is suffering because half of his face is numb. But because we have sentencing coming up, so we're under certain sensitive legal guidelines. But we're happy to be on with such a progressive audience. This case was brought to light through the determination of Black Lawyers for Justice, of myself as the attorney for Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker and Mississippi Counsel Trent Walker. From early January, we have advocated strongly and vigorously in every way, and we have worked with community activists in Mississippi and throughout the country in order to bring the truth that is coming to light today, that these defendants, Hunter Elwood, Christian Dedman, Brett McAlpin, Middleton, Osdike, and Joshua Hartfield, that they're called the Rankin County Goon Squad. They're known in the community as the Rankin County Death Squad. This has been occurring for a long time under the leadership of Sheriff Brian Bailey, who should be the subject of criminal investigation also. And they have been getting away with this so long that they felt emboldened to act in such a radical and callous way on that night of January 24th, 2023. But it's through persistence. It's through intense legal advocacy, with us advocating to the U.S. Justice Department, collecting evidence and applying legal pressure and all kinds of pressure to bring about what is now historic. Last Thursday, these 6 defendants pled guilty to 14 federal criminal charges. They'll plead guilty to more state charges Monday. This is the first time, democracy now, this is the first time that a white Mississippi police officer has ever been held criminally responsible for harming a black person. And we know that plenty of police brutality has occurred not only in Rankin County under Brian Bailey, but throughout the state of Mississippi.
He said this is the first time that white officers have been held accountable for harming black people. Mississippi been racist forever. And this is the first time that white officers been held accountable. If that's not crazy, what is? And these people felt so bold to do this to these black people and then try to plant the evidence on them.
This is a history-making moment. I'm just so sorry it had to come on the backs of the pain and the suffering, the torture and the shooting and the abuse and waterboarding of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, our clients.
I can't bear to go to Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker meeting you in this way for what you went through that horrific January night. But I'm wondering if each of you could respond to the guilty plea of these officers and what it means to you that some of them may be facing life in prison. Michael Jenkins, let's begin with you.
I feel great that we're finally getting justice. You know, after months. You know, at first they didn't even believe us. You know, for a while I didn't think they were gonna even get a slap on the wrist or anything. But I feel great about it.
And I know it's difficult for you to talk with the gun in your mouth. The police shot you through your mouth, lacerating your tongue. It went through to your neck, shredding that area of your neck. I am only glad that you can be with us today. Did you think you were going to survive that night, Michael?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I'm still going through pain right now. My whole face numb, my mouth hurting right now as we speak.
And Eddie Parker, if you can talk about your response to this plea deal.
It's a long time coming. It's something I say there's also history too, you know, coming from a long way of going through this situation with the same police officers, and pretty much you steer clear, you know, to stay out the way so you wouldn't end up in this situation. But ending up in this situation wasn't part of me, you know, staying clear. So I'm astounded. I'm real happy that it's finally come to a point where they're getting getting a feeling of what they dish out to people, you know, day in, day out.
I want to say this. You're not free in America. You don't have freedom of speech. You're just here. You're just living on earth. Anything can go any way at any moment. But certain laws are put in place, but they will be broken if they want to change them. Pay attention to that, man.
And I really misspoke because it's not a deal. They have pled guilty. The idea that they call themselves, Eddie Parker, that they call themselves the Goon Squad, your thoughts?
That's the Goon Squad. That seems to be a crime organization that I guess they were paid to go out and you know, to stop. But they became that themselves. I believe policing and, you know, the public, you know, go hand in hand. I mean, they're people just like us. You know, they want to be held accountable for, you know, everything they do. They want to get, you know, this, you know, certain, I guess you say, the end of the stick treatment as, you know, being the golden ones. But they're not. They're people just like us. I mean, they go out and they do, you know, the opposite of what they're getting paid to do. I think it's very horrendous how they can call themselves, you know, Goon Squad and, you know, still put on a badge and say they're protecting people.
Malik Shabazz, your lawsuit also mentions other times Rankin County Sheriff deputies used excessive force. I want to ask you about Damian Cameron, who died in 2021 after being taken into custody by the same Rankin County Sheriff's deputies who later attacked Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker. This is
These same officers attacked another person in 2021 and killed the man. The same officers. And it took 2 years later for something like this to happen and some pressure to get pushed for these officers to get in charge. But they still haven't even been charged for the killing of the man in 2021. But they still had a badge. They still was supposed to be protecting and serving. This is the law now.
clip from a WAPT news report featuring Jenkins' mother, Monica Lee.
A news release from the Rankin County Sheriff's Office says deputies got a call about a burglary and vandalism. When they arrived, Damian was identified as the suspect. The release says as a deputy approached him, he began to fight and resist arrest. They were able to eventually get him into custody and into a patrol car.
And I'm thinking they're taking my son to jail. So I go outside to tell my son goodbye and I love him and I'll be up there tomorrow. At that point, when I got to the side of the truck, my son was laid on the ground, unresponsive.
Monica Lee has said she believes if the sheriff had taken action against the deputies involved in her son's death, maybe they would not have gone on to attack Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker.
Of course. If they were held accountable for that situation, they wouldn't be able to do it again. But a lot of things in Mississippi get swept under the rug, as we see.
The lawsuit also holds Sheriff Bailey responsible for failing to properly train the deputies involved in these incidents. This is Rankin County Sheriff Brian Bailey speaking last week about the charges his former deputies pled guilty to.
Based on the facts and their guilty pleas, all of the former deputies lied to me that night of this incident in January. We have cooperated fully with all outside investigating agencies to uncover the truth and bring justice to the victims. We've also sought assistance from outside agencies and consultants to help us in repairing our trust with the community.
So that was Rankin.
Nah, man, you can look and tell that he knows that these officers was like that. If situations been happening like this over time, and it's been multiple situations, and now being as though that the FBI got involved with it, he wants to say that they were untruthful to him and that they're cooperating with all outside sources. This has been going on in the department. The department has been corrupt. He should be charged. It should be a major investigation on him, not just letting him continue to be the sheriff.
Rankin County Sheriff Brian Bailey speaking last week. Malik Shabazz, the civil rights attorney who has brought the lawsuit on behalf of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, if you can respond to the sheriff and to this previous case.
Yes. First of all, I want to give honors to Miss Monica Lee, who is the mother of Damian Cameron, attorney Trent Walker, and myself. We represent Miss Monica Lee for the death of Damian Cameron, which occurred at the hands of the Rankin County Sheriff's Department and its officers, including Hunter Elwood, the shooter who didn't just shoot Michael Jenkins in his mouth. He placed the gun inside Michael Jenkins' mouth and held it for an extended period of time, almost up to a minute, before he intentionally shot Michael Jenkins in his mouth, attempting to kill him. Yes.
A police officer put the gun inside of the man's mouth, held it there, and shot this man. How the hell was the officer so comfortable, if this town wasn't so racist, for him to do that? You gotta know that he felt that this was gonna get covered up. To bust a gunshot in the man's mouth? God.
Ms. Lee is correct. If they would not have participated in a cover-up around Damian Cameron's death, Damian Cameron's death is analogous and very similar to George Floyd's death. It was Hunter Elwood and Luke Stickman who put the knees on Damian Cameron's back and on his neck, causing trauma to his neck and causing hemorrhages in both of Damian Cameron's eyes, meaning that the compression on his neck is what led to asphyxiation and his actual cause of death. But the autopsy mysteriously was ruled undetermined. With all of the evidence that I'm saying and all of the gruesome photos of the neck injuries and the hemorrhages of the eyes bulging out of his head, the autopsy finding was mysteriously undetermined.
So that lets you know basically the whole town is racist working together. When the man went in for the autopsy and they doing the check and see what's going on, they got a call from the police station. Just sweep this one under the rug. This what it is.
The autopsy itself is missing certain information, and therefore myself and Black Lawyers for Justice, we have our own forensic pathologist who are coming forth shortly to show you that this was a homicide and that Rankin County and Brian Bailey refused to provide the state medical examiner with information to reach a proper conclusion because they were all protecting the officers from criminal prosecution. Therefore, the autopsy is suspicious. The autopsy and the efforts to have a genuine autopsy, it was covered up by Rankin County. And Brian Bailey has been a part of this. Ms. Lee is correct. If they hadn't been trying to cover up, if Bailey hadn't been trying to justify his officers. No, he didn't just not train them. He has participated in acts of excessive force with his department, according to the courts. When Hunter Elwood shot Pierre Woods in Rankin County on the ground, and he gunned him and he shot him 9 times with his rifle, and the man was no threat to him. Sheriff Bailey was on the scene, and a federal judge ruled that Bailey could not have qualified immunity because he ratified and watched it all go on in person. And so the truth is coming out about the death of Damian Cameron and how they had the knees on his neck like his mother has testified by affidavit to, and they had the knees on his neck that crushed the life out of Damian Cameron, and they did nothing about it. They've lied to us, but we're going to bring that case. That case is coming back to life. Rankin County is infested with white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan. They infiltrated the sheriff's department. Brian Bailey has known about this. Many of these criminals were on duty up until June 1st, only through the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and U.S. Department of Justice leader Kristen Clark and her Southern District in Mississippi, who've done a great job. Only through their efforts has Brian Bailey, sheriff, trying to come to some remorse. He has not even apologized to the victims. We demand that Brian Bailey step down now. He's a part of a pattern of practice and a culture and a custom of terrorism by his department. We have blacks, whites, rich, poor. They have been beaten by his officers. He's known this all along, and the struggle continues. In this case, for compensation for these 2 suffering victims, Jenkins and Parker, but for all of the victims of Rankin County terrorism. It's the #1 county for terrorism and white supremacist infiltration. Case in point, before I close, Christian Detman. It's coming out, he has family members that have pled guilty in Mississippi to hate crimes. I mean, a lot more is going to come out about this. Rankin County is infested with white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan, and it's in the police departments.
And Malik Shabazz, can you place Rankin County for us in 2 ways, in history and also just geographically? It's right near Jackson, the capital.
Yes. Attorney Trent Walker says, who grew up in Rankin County, my partner, Attorney Trent Walker, states that this was customary in Rankin County. They beat first and they don't ask questions later. They beat you, they kill you, and you are ordered not to say anything about it. Hunter Elwood, the shooter, actually pled guilty in federal court to another crime he had committed, which contained a similar fact to what he did in the home of Jenkins and Parker. When these deputies busted in to begin this torture session, Hunter Elwood shot his gun off as an intimidation against Jenkins and Parker. Before he shot Michael later, he shot his gun off. Well, he pled guilty in federal court to doing the same thing to another person in Rankin County. He just shooting his gun off like that. So what we're saying, ma'am, is that all of these truths are going to come to light. Rankin County has done this for a long time. It's near Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson, Mississippi, and I believe the county is sort of a reaction to Jackson. Jackson is in Hinds County. It's majority black, and there's hostility towards Jackson. And Rankin is like a white enclave that is next to Jackson, and it's set up like almost like a political, social antithesis or against Jackson. And so they're clear in Rankin, just 20 minutes away from Jackson, Mississippi, just like these deputies said. They didn't want any black men living in the area. The mere fact that there were black men in this area, that they were going to carry out this mission and let them know that they were not welcome and they were going to violate all laws and break in. It's because they have determined, I believe these deputies and others in that county have determined that Rankin County is for whites and Hinds County is for blacks. And they're going to enforce it under the color of law, through violence and torture. Not to mention, especially on this program, we cannot forget waterboarding. Waterboarding was where the United States military was condemned for using these techniques at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, in the Iraq War. The military denounced this. But in 2023, incredibly, in Rankin County, these deputies, Elwood, McAlpin, Dedman, Updike, Middleton, Hartsfield, they actually waterboarded the two men you see now. They had them on their backs. They had them handcuffs. They had them intimidated, and they were pouring milk, liquids, and grease all over their faces in this insane interrogation and intimidation act. Then after they did all this, can you imagine law enforcement with dildos and sexual devices in their possession, attempting and putting it in the mouths? I hate to say this, that happened to the brothers, but we got to know their pain and suffering. To take a dildo and to shove it in the mouths of handcuffed and bound men, and then waterboard them like that on the ground, and then hurl eggs at them, and then make them strip naked in the shower to try to clean this mess up, strip these men naked in front of these criminals. You know, it just never fails to ignite my passion, and therefore tactically and strategically, we are after Rankin County and we won't let up.
I want to end with the voices of Michael, Corey Jenkins, and Eddie Terrell Parker. How you have lived through the aftermath of this, the trauma that you have experienced, and what you want to come out of this. I mean, it looks like you are exposing an entire sheriff's department in Mississippi. Let's begin with Eddie Parker.
We want justice. We want justice for everyone that has gone through this with Rankin County or gone through this because of Rankin County. We want justice for the ones that were afraid to speak up. You know, justice for the ones that can't speak up. We want you know, something new and better, you know, and clean to come out of this.
And Michael Jenkins.
Basically the same thing, to make sure nobody never go through what we went through again. You know, animals don't get treated like this. You know, I ain't never seen no animal get treated like this.
And you know what's crazy? For these brothers speaking up and these officers getting charged, I can guarantee you that in Mississippi where this happened at, there's people that still look at these brothers like they did something wrong because these white officers went to jail. They probably don't feel that they did anything wrong because they did it to these black people. Now that's real crazy right there.
Well,
just to make sure.
I just want to thank you, Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker, for your bravery in coming forward and telling your stories. And also, I want to thank Malik Shabazz, the civil. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show in Mississippi, where 6 former law enforcement officers have been sentenced to between 10 and 40 years in prison each for raiding a home and torturing 2 black men. The officers, all of whom are white, belong to a group that described itself as the Goon Squad. In January of 2023, the 6 officers burst into a home, then beat, handcuffed, waterboarded, and tasered Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker. The officers also sexually abused them with an object while shouting racial slurs. One of the officers put a gun in Jenkins' mouth for a mock execution and pulled the trigger. The bullet lacerated his tongue, broke his jaw, exited through his neck. The officers then planted drugs at the scene in an attempt to cover up their act. The attack occurred in the majority white Rankin County, which is about 20 miles away from majority black Jackson, Mississippi. Some of the officers were also sentenced for their role in a separate assault just 2 weeks earlier, when another member of the goon squad repeatedly tased a man and put his genitals in his mouth. While the charges focused on these two cases, the New York Times and Mississippi Today have revealed that deputies in the Rankin County Sheriff's Department have for decades barged into homes, handcuffed people, tortured them for information or confessions. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a statement Thursday saying, quote, "The depravity of the crimes committed by these defendants cannot be overstated, and they will now spend between 10 and 40 years in prison for their heinous attack on citizens they had sworn to protect," AG Merrick Garland said. We go now to Jackson, Mississippi, where we're joined by Eddie Parker, as well as his attorney, Malik Shabazz, who is with Black Lawyers for Justice. Malik Shabazz, let's begin with you. Can you talk about the courtroom scene and the sentencing of these sheriff's deputies and police officers for what they did?
Good morning to the Democracy Now! Audience and Ms. Goodman. The scene inside of this courtroom in the United States District Court for the sentencing of the goon squad was absolutely incredible, and you wouldn't believe it if it was a movie. I mean, to see the big, bad, intimidating, murderous goon squad, to see all of them there, to see all of them in court, crying tears out of their eyes and begging the judge, begging Eddie and Michael, and in this packed room was absolutely incredible. But it was well-deserved because so many other families and victims have had to shed those tears and go to jail for a long time behind their crimes and lies. I mean, Amy, it was absolutely incredible, and never have we seen this many police officers sentenced to this kind of time in 1 week, and it was awesome.
Malik Shabazz, talk about how this self-described goon squad operated.
Okay, well, they operate worse than criminals. I mean, they handcuff people. They like they did to Eddie. When they handcuff, they don't use warrants. They beat, they tase, they take their private parts out of their pants on another victim. They use dildos on Eddie and Michael, at least attempted to use them on Eddie and Michael. They waterboard like U.S. troops did in Iraq. They put guns to heads, guns in mouths. They shoot in mouths. I mean, they are everything that you have ever heard that police may do, they did. They throw down guns, they carry throw-down guns, they plant guns, they steal videotapes. And this is why they have received the longest and strongest sentences for any police brutality case in the history of the United States of America and even the world. This week, the 132 years given to the goon squad defendants represent the longest criminal sentences ever given out collectively and individually to police officers in the history of the United States of America. And they deserve every day and an hour of it.
Eddie Terrell Parker, your feelings in the courtroom after having been so seriously brutalized and tortured, to see these officers put away for years.
It was a moment in history. I mean, it was satisfying. I enjoyed every second of sitting and watching it all, come to reality.
I wanted to turn to Michael Jenkins' mother, Mary Jenkins, who earlier in the week spoke outside the federal courthouse in Jackson, Mississippi.
When I first found out that my son was shot and that he was shot in the mouth, I was almost certain that he was dead. I called Rankin County, and at first they wouldn't let me speak with anyone. They said they were in a meeting. And when I finally spoke with someone, I asked him if my son was alive. And he said, as far as I know. I said, well, when can I see him? He said, when we let you see him. This is a crying mother on the phone trying to inquire about her son. He said, Michael is our property. That's what that deputy told me on the phone. My son shot in the mouth, and he's telling me that Michael is their property.
That's Mary Jenkins, Michael Corey Jenkins' mother. Malik Shabazz, will Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker also civilly sue for not only personally these men, but clearly one of the things that their lawyers argued, the lawyers for the sheriff's deputies and the officers, is that there was this permissive atmosphere that allowed them to operate in this way. Will they be suing the state or the city?
No, we are suing Rankin County and its Board of Supervisors and Sheriff Brian Bailey, who was supposed to be running a department that supervised and monitored its officers. Unfortunately, during the sentencing hearings, it came out that Brett McAlpin, who is the chief investigative officer, which is similar to internal affairs, the criminals ran the department in Rankin. And that's why they are facing a very large civil judgment and civil trial in this case. This is a pattern and practice of the Rankin County Police Department to routinely ignore constitutional right violations. I want to say one thing, and then I want you to hear from Mississippi attorney Trent Walker. He's with me. He's from Rankin. But Eddie Terrell Parker gave the most powerful victims' testimony in these 6 days, these 3 days of sentencing these 6 defendants. He was very powerful. Mr. Mel Jenkins, Michael Jenkins' father, were very influential in these hearings. But I would like you to hear a further answer on your question from Mississippi attorney Trent Walker, who's from Rankin County. Here he is.
Good morning.
Hi, Trent Walker.
Hello.
If you could go ahead. If you can talk about the significance of what's happened, and does this open up hundreds of cases going back decades?
It should.
It should open up hundreds of cases going back decades. Anything that these 6 have touched, in point of fact, given the testimony that they themselves gave, and they used terms like there was a culture of violence. More than one of them said that, and that violence and brutality was expected for you to work on the night shift, which they did not refer to as the night shift. They talked about it as the goon squad shift. And so, yes, anything that they touch should go back, be re-examined, and really just as a matter of course overturned. Because when you find that they're willing to plant evidence and falsify reports, they had Michael Jenkins charged with aggravated assault on a police officer and with possession of drugs. Michael could have been sentenced to up to 38 years in prison.
After they shot him in the mouth.
Criminal law practitioner in Rankin County, I can tell you, he would not have been slapped on the wrist, and he would have served many years in prison for those charges that they falsified and put on him.
I want to go to U.S. Attorney Darren Lamarck, speaking last year, announcing the federal charges against the former officers for the attack.
These defendants committed heinous acts of violence against handcuffed victims, whom they terrorized under color of law. As reflected in the information unsealed today, these men sexually abused their victims, repeatedly tased them, tortured them, all under the authority of the badge which they disgraced. But not only did they brazenly commit these acts, but after inflicting serious bodily injury by firing a shot through one of the victims' mouths, They left him lying in a pool of blood. Gathered on the porch of the house.
And this is the
to
police
discuss
now.
how to cover it up. What indifference. What disregard for life.
And this is the police.
So I'm wondering if either Trent Walker or Malik Shabazz can talk about the state charges, also federal charges, what this means. We're talking about officers sentenced not only for the attack that we're describing today on Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker, but for 2 weeks before when they barged into someone's home. I think this was Dedmon. And how has he been described? The judge said he committed the most shocking, brutal, and cruel acts imaginable. Attorney Shabazz, you've described Dedmon as oppressive and sick. Talk about these acts that you know about that they did, that they were sentenced for in addition to the case of Michael and Eddie.
Well, about a month before, they had targeted a person named Adam Schmidt, and Adam Schmidt allegedly had offended Dedmon because he had allegedly stolen something from one of Dedmon's friends. So the Goon Squad gangsters, they had his tag and they had the tag tracers, and they had an order out. That if they found him driving anywhere without any probable cause to stop him, that they were going to stop him and deal with him. They found him one night. They called Dedmon, who came off duty, on duty, and then Dedmon, who was on this night shift. Now, I want to remind you that according to the sentencing hearings, you could not work the night shift in Rankin County Sheriff's Department without being a part of the Goon Squad. And overall, you could not rise or be promoted into the Rankin County Sheriff's Department without participating in violence and being violent at night with the Goon Squad. And every one of the defendants said that they were doing okay in their careers until they were inducted into this gang called the Goon Squad. Okay, so Dedmon himself, it's so much sickness here, but any officer who you see that will whip out his private parts and attempt to put it in the mouth of a defendant on the side of the road, take his gun out, shoot it by the side of his head to make him believe he's going to be killed, pull his pants down while handcuffed. This came out in court. Pull the man pants down.
Man, they should have got the death penalty.
Grabbed his genitals, told him how the size of his genitals, then dry humped him. I said that it came out in court that Dedmon dry humped the man after they took him to a private house in another jurisdiction. I mean, you wouldn't believe it if you saw it in a movie, but I'm imagining it'll be that one day. But you know, in Mississippi, I gotta say this. We have a Department of Justice Civil Rights Division that is headed by a black woman, and Kristen Clark takes her job seriously, and her Southern Division attorneys have pursued and made history in this area. And Judge Thomas Lee, they thought that Judge Thomas Lee down here in Mississippi would not do justice, and oh, how he has set a standard and put police officers on notice all over America that if you do the crime, you're going to do the time, just like anybody else.
Well, I just want to say, Eddie Terrell Parker, you and Michael Corey Jenkins, amazingly brave in coming forward and describing what happened to you, which seems to have broken open all of these investigations right now. I want to thank civil rights attorney Malik Shabazz and Trent Walker with Black Lawyers for Justice, and Eddie Parker, who was tortured by the Goon Squad. Thank you so much joining us from Jackson, Mississippi. And that.
Wow.
A fifth former sheriff's deputy in Mississippi has been sentenced for his part in torturing two black men last year. 53-year-old Brett McAlpin was sentenced to more than 27 years in federal prison. The final former officer, Joshua Hartfield, who worked for a different police department, is also being sentenced today. Last August, the men admitted to breaking into a home and using stun guns, a sex toy, and other objects to torture the men. So far, a federal judge has given sentences ranging from 17.5 to 40 years. For more, let's bring in New York Law School professor Kirk Burkhalter. He's also the director of the school's 21st Century Policing Project. Kirk, all 6 former deputies were at the scene. They played a part in torturing these 2 men. I was in the courtroom yesterday, and the level of emotion these men still feel and their relatives is immeasurable. Why do you see this varying degrees of sentencing when it comes to some getting 17.5 years and one man getting 40 years?
So the sentencing is varied by the degree of culpability, meaning what particular acts that one person committed. So the reason why they're all receiving heavy sentences is because they all worked in together in some form of conspiracy. However, who actually pulled the trigger, for instance, of the gun, who actually used the object for the sexual abuse? And I think that varies in degree, and also who developed the concept of the cover-up and who was more active in that respect, as opposed to who was just present and kind of going along. They're all culpable. However, there are different degrees of culpability based on what they did.
And the legal team representing the victims, that being Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, they said they had a nickname for Christian Dedman, calling him Officer Dead Lee. He also conducted the sexual assaults. But what does this case show us? How much does it highlight just this larger issue within police departments of turning a blind eye to police brutality? When one of the men was speaking in the courtroom yesterday, he was in tears, saying that he hopes the sentence brings some sense of closure for the victims and that he should have stood up and he was a coward. But what's the reality?
Well, the first reality is that in cases like this, this is reminiscent to, for instance, the incident with George Floyd, the heinous murder of George Floyd. These activities were known to the police department. We often see that, these police officers are the group of, when they're acting in a group, they have some type of nickname, such as Goon Squad. Other people within the department knew that this person or persons tend to be heavy-handed, tend to abuse their authority, tend to abuse force. So this is nothing new. It's not like in most cases where these police officers wake up in the morning and turn from this law-abiding citizen to this outrageously mean person. So that's the first thing that stands out. And then the second, of course, that leads to the second point of accountability. What do police departments do when they learn of an individual who operates outside the bounds of law? Do they do nothing, or do they take action? When police departments fail to take action, that tends to send a signal to other officers, let me keep my mouth shut, let me go along. Clearly, the department has no problem with this type of activity. So it has to start from the top. And then finally, it's absolutely fascinating that 6 police officers can operate outside the bounds of law, be unaccountable, no one knows where they are. They can commit all these heinous acts without anyone looking for them. So the police department there is broken, plain and simple.
What advice do you give people? Because people watch this with 2 sentiments. On one hand, they're relieved to see justice being done. On the other hand, to your point about leadership, Sheriff Brian Bailey is still in his post there in Rankin County. The victims and their legal reps are filing a lawsuit, hundreds of millions of dollars. They want him out of the post. But what advice would you give to communities who care about safety? And as you say, leadership starts at the top. So how should they approach the next few months and weeks?
Well, it certainly illustrates that we, meaning the public, shouldn't have to wait until there is some heinous act committed in order to take some type of corrective action. The sheriff, I'm certain, has lost confidence of the civilian population there and should be removed, plain and simple. As far as recourse, I think the only recourse when you have a system that is broken would be to through the federal authorities, the Justice Department and the FBI and so forth, unfortunately. In a larger jurisdiction, I think it's easier to seek some type of recourse through state measures because you have so many different entities and they're staffed by so many different people. But the problem is in a small jurisdiction, prosecutors and the local law enforcement authorities tend to work together. So it's very difficult to seek relief unless one goes to the federal authorities. This is just illustrative, really, of how we need some type of national standard, some type of national metric, some way, as you put it, for the civilian population to seek recourse rather than waiting for something like this to happen, to occur. Because there have been complaints here in this police department between the sheriff's treatment of the African-American community there.
And none of this would have come to light if the victims didn't speak out, if Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, despite the humiliation and the embarrassment and the pain, if they didn't open up and share what happened, justice would not have been done. Kirk Burkhalter, thanks for joining us today on this.
Yeah, they should definitely receive the death penalty.
Glad you're streaming with us. Well,
it's not enough years that can justify and give justice for this, because they did sexual acts to the people and shot the man. They were doing this to other people, and now they want to cry about it. It's like, it's crazy.
Well, they beat, handcuffed, and sexually assaulted 2 black men and their sheriff deputies. One of the victims even shot in the mouth. Well, another one of those deputies that all admitted to the crimes in committing these horrifying and dehumanizing attacks on these victims in Mississippi, well, they've been sentenced to years in prison. This one in particular, 27 years in prison now.
So the deputies, this is all taking place in Mississippi, Rankin County, Mississippi. They say they tried to cover it all up after doing it. ABC News' Morgan Norwood joins us now with what happened so far in court today. Brett McAlpin, Morgan, I guess, was sentenced today. Tell us about it.
Yeah, throughout this sentencing phase, we've heard from the judge, but we've also been able to hear from this so-called goon squad, the judge calling them despicable. And during the sentencing phase, again, we've heard the horrific details of that brutal beating and torture. Former Sheriff's Deputy Brett McAlpin sentenced today to close to 27 years in prison. He's one of the last 2 to learn their fate. Not only did he take part in that brutal beating of the men that you just laid out, he also served as the lookout and threatened to kill other officers if they spoke up about this. McAlpin nodded to his family in the courtroom today wearing that orange jumpsuit and offered an apology before the judge read the sentence. He said, quote, "This was all very wrong, going on to say, quote, "I'm really sorry for being a part of something that made law enforcement look so bad." We understand that he didn't directly address the victims in that courtroom. Guys?
This is one of these stories where you have to give context. I mean, we're talking about Mississippi, where Emmett Till was beaten and killed.
And countless others.
Yes, and that's what led to the civil rights movement. It's like we have gone completely backwards, and now you have these sheriff's deputies, calling it, they are a goon squad, carrying out the same type of brutal attacks that happened decades ago. Like, haven't they learned from history? Hasn't this state learned from history? I just want to know what's going to happen to this sheriff who says he's not going anywhere.
He got it done.
And then I am told, Morgan, right, that the last deputy, a part of this goon squad, is going to be sentenced. I mean, the legal trouble is not over for any of these folks.
Far from over, and I'm glad that you guys mentioned just the history and the context of Mississippi. Is something that I know personally as I was born in that state, but the legal battle is far from over in terms of the remaining members of this goon squad. And that leaves Joshua Hartfield, former Richland police officer who tased the 2 men as they were being handcuffed and then tried to get rid of that evidence, to that point, based on the sentences already handed up in his co-defendants. He's looking at decades in prison as well. And I just want to point out, the whole point of these these, heavy-handed sentences was to send a strong message that, we're not going to go backwards, in time and relive the trauma. But in terms of what this means for the victims in this case, speaking of trauma, this has been very difficult for them, right? Their attorneys saying this week that they still struggle, with the enduring trauma, the mental aspect of this brutal attack. Eddie Parker says he forgives the officers. However, Michael Jenkins says he is not quite there yet. As for what's next, and, they haven't been sentenced yet on the state charges. That is to come. So we could be looking at much more prison time on top of what they've been sentenced for today. But in addition, this so-called goon squad is now looking at a $400 million federal lawsuit. So again, the legal battle is far from over, guys.
Yeah, and it should continue, and more people need to be held accountable, including the sheriff who said he had no idea of this behavior that was taking place, which is so not true. And you're not talking about just one deputy, you're talking about six. I mean, this is a cultural problem. Yeah. Exactly. And Morgan, didn't know you were from Mississippi, so I'm sure, this hits you much differently and your family. So I'm glad we're talking about it. Things need to change. Thanks, Morgan.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, listen, the sheriff need to go. The sheriff knows what's going on.
Count one of the information statement showed that on or about January the 24th, 2023, in Rankin County, Mississippi, and within the jurisdiction of this court, the defendant, Hunter Thomas Elward, did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously, purposely, knowingly, or recklessly cause serious bodily injury to Michael Corey Jenkins under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life by shooting Michael Corey Jenkins in the mouth with a firearm in direct violation of Section 97.3.7, subsection 2A of Mississippi Code of 1972 as amended, contrary to the form of the statute in such cases provided and against the peace and dignity of the state of Mississippi. As to count two, the state would show that on or about January the 24th, 2023 in Rankin County, Mississippi, and within the jurisdiction of this court, the defendant, Hunter Thomas Elward, did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously break and enter the dwelling house of Michael Corey Jenkins and or Christy Wally and or Eddie Terrell Parker with the intent to commit the crime of assault therein under circumstances likely to terrorize any person who is actually occupying the house at the time of the criminal invasion of the premises, in direct violation of Section 97.17.23, subsection 2, Mississippi Code of 1972 as amended, contrary to the form of the statute in such cases provided and against the peace and dignity of the state of Mississippi. As to count three, the state of Mississippi would show that on or about January the 24th, 2023 in Rankin County, Mississippi, and within the jurisdiction of this court, the defendant, Hunter Thomas Elward, did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously, corruptly agree, conspire, and confederate, each with Christian Lee Dedman, Jeffrey Arwood Middleton, Joshua Allen Hartfield, Daniel Reddy Opdyke, and Brett Morris McAlpin to commit a crime, to wit, hindering prosecution in the first degree in violation of Section 97-1-1, Mississippi Code 1972 as amended, contrary to the form of the statutes in such cases provided and against the peace and dignity of the state of Mississippi. And the conduct described in each of these counts 1, 2, and 3, is based on two or more acts or transactions connected together and constituting part of a common scheme or plan, and all acts therein are against the peace and dignity of the state of Mississippi.
This is the officer that shot the man in the mouth.
Yes, Your Honor. You understand you have a right to an attorney? Yes, Your Honor. You have a right to a trial by jury. We, the 12 jurors, must be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of your guilt before you can be found guilty of the sentence. You understand? Yes, Your Honor. You also have a right to confront and cross-examine witnesses who testify against you, and a right to subpoena witnesses who testify on your behalf. You understand that? Yes, Your Honor. You also have a right to remain silent. Choose to remain silent or instruct the jury that no adverse inference will be drawn from your decision not to testify. You understand that? You also have a right to an appeal. If you're not more the cost of the appeal, that cost and the cost of your attorney be paid for by the state. You understand that? Yes, Your Honor. You understand about pleading guilty would be waiving or giving up these constitutional rights? Yes, Your Honor. If you desire to waive and give up these rights and proceed with your guilty plea? Yes, Your Honor. You understand that count 1, aggravated assault, carries $0 to $10,000 fine and 1 to 20 years in prison. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor. Also, count 2, burglary or home invasion, carries a fine of $0 to $10,000 and 10 to 25 years in prison. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor. And count 3, conspiracy to commit hindering prosecution in the first degree, carries $0 to $5,000 and 0 to 5 years in prison. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor. All right. Do you have any felony convictions anywhere?
No, other than the guilty plea in front of the court.
Is that right? Is that right, Mr. Elmer?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. What's the factual basis here?
Your Honor, on January the 24th, 2023, Hunter Elward was employed as a patrol deputy with the Rankin County Sheriff's Office. Elward worked the 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. shift, along with Lieutenant Jeffrey Middleton and Deputy Daniel Opdyke. Their shift called themselves the Goon Squad because of their willingness to use excessive force and not to report it. Middleton provided Elward with a challenge coin with the unofficial Goon Squad logo on the front and the official Rankin County Sheriff's Office logo on the back. On January the 24th, 2023, Christian Dedman, a narcotics officer with the Rankin County Sheriff's Office, sent a text message to Opdyke, Middleton, and Elward asking them, "Are y'all available for a mission?" Dedman messaged the group that they were going to the property on Connerly Road and warned them there is a chance of cameras, let's approach east and work easy. Elward understood work easy to mean knock on the door rather than to kick it down. Elward texted back an eye roll emoji, and Opdyke texted a gif of a baby crying. Dedman messaged the group, "If we don't see cameras, go." Elward understood that to mean that if they did not see surveillance cameras at the property, then they should enter the property without a warrant. Dedman messaged the group, "No bad mugshots." Elward understood no bad mugshots to be a green light to use excessive force on parts of the body not captured by a mugshot. Opdyke, Middleton, and Elward each drove to the Cato Volunteer Fire Department, parked their vehicles, and waited for Dedman. When Dedman's truck drove past them, Opdyke, Middleton, and Elward pulled out from the Cato Volunteer Fire Department and followed Dedman to the property. When they arrived at the property, they all parked in the driveway. Chief Investigator Brett McAlpin, who had been surveilling the property from down the street, pulled in behind them. Noticing the surveillance camera above the front door of the property, Dedman, Elward, and Opdyke walked around to the carport door, which had no surveillance camera covering it. Dedman and Opdyke each kicked in the carport door, but it did not open. Elward kicked the carport door, and it swung open. Opdyke, Dedman, and Elward entered the home without consent, a warrant, or exigent circumstances. Elward saw two black men inside, MJ and EP. Officers issued them commands, and they complied. Dedman handcuffed MJ and tased him multiple times. Elward handcuffed EP and tased him multiple times. Opdyke kicked EP in the ribs. There was no probable cause to believe that MJ or EP had committed any crimes, and there was no reason to kick or tase them. Dedman asked EP where they were keeping the drugs. Dedman pulled out his gun, aimed it out the back door, and fired. Dedman again demanded to know where the drugs were. The defendants moved MJ and EP, who were still in handcuffs, to the living room, taunted them, and accused them of taking advantage of the white woman who owned the house, and warned them to stay out of Rankin County and go back to Jackson or to their side of the Pearl River, areas with higher concentrations of black residents. Opdyke left the living room and returned with a dildo mounted on the end of a BB gun. Dedman grabbed the dildo from Opdyke and slapped EP and MJ in the face with it. Dedman forced MJ and EP onto their knees with their backs to Dedman, and Dedman threatened to anally rape MJ and EP with the dildo. Dedman grabbed the back of MJ's pants and moved the dildo toward his backside, but Dedman stopped when he noticed that MJ had defecated on himself. Dedman forced MJ and EP onto their backs on the floor of the living room. Elward held them down, and Dedman poured milk, alcohol, and chocolate syrup on their faces and into their mouths. Elward grabbed a carton of eggs from the kitchen and threw the eggs at MJ and EP. MJ and EP were ordered to strip naked and shower off. Their handcuffs were removed. After MJ and EP showered off and changed into clean underwear and sweats, they were handcuffed again and brought to the side bedroom adjacent to the carport. The officers began discussing the comparative strength of their respective tasers, and they decided to test their tasers on MJ and EP to see which one was the most powerful. Dedman, Elward, Hartfield, and Middleton each tased MJ and EP, while MJ and EP were handcuffed and not resisting. Elward surreptitiously removed a bullet from the chamber of his gun. Elward forced his gun into MJ's mouth and pulled the trigger. The unloaded gun clicked but did not discharge. Elward racked the slide, forced the gun back into MJ's mouth, and pulled the trigger again. This time, the gun discharged, and MJ collapsed onto the floor. All 6 officers huddled up on the back screened-in porch to discuss what to do. They devised and agreed on a false cover story that Elward brought MJ into the side bedroom to conduct a controlled drug buy over the phone, that Elward had removed MJ's handcuffs, that MJ had reached for a gun, and that Elward had shot MJ in self-defense. Elward said he would take care of the gun. Elward went back inside, grabbed the BB gun, and brought it to the side bedroom where MJ was still bleeding from the mouth and neck and was not receiving medical attention. Elwood removed MJ's handcuffs and planted the BB gun next to MJ. Dedmon said he would take care of the drugs. Elwood understood Dedmon's comment to mean that Dedmon would plant drugs on MJ. To limit the number of witnesses to the shooting, the officers agreed to tell investigators that at the time of the shooting, McAlpin and Middleton had left the property and were driving home. Dedmon and Hartfield were at Dedmon's truck, and Opdyke was escorting EP to a patrol car. While Elwood and the other officers were attempting to cover up their misconduct, MJ continued to bleed in the side bedroom. Elwood wrote and submitted a false report, knowing at the time that it was false, for the purpose of covering up their misconduct. Elwood was interviewed by investigators with the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. Elwood lied to the MBI investigators and withheld material information for the purpose of covering up their misconduct. McAlpin, Dedmon, and Elwood agreed to file false charges on MJ in order to corroborate their false cover story. On January the 25th, 2023, Elwood signed a sworn affidavit that MJ committed felony aggravated assault on a police officer in violation of Mississippi Code 9737 subsection 2 under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life by obtaining a firearm and then aiming and pointing it in the direction of Deputy Elwood. All of these acts occurring in Rankin County, Mississippi, and in the jurisdiction of this court.
Mr. Elwood, do you have any disagreement with this factual basis? Any threats been made against you? Has any use of force or intimidation made cause you to change your plea from not guilty to guilty? Any promises of a reward been made to you in return for you change your plea from not guilty to guilty? After speaking to your attorney, you the one that decided to plead guilty. Telling the court you're freely and voluntarily admitting your guilt to the crimes that you're pleading guilty to. And you pleading guilty because you are guilty. You understand this court is not bound by any plea bargaining agreement to impose the maximum sentence here. You also understand if I accept your plea, you have no right to appeal. You satisfied with your attorney's representation? You wish to make any complaints about it? Do you have any questions about your rights and the crimes you're pleading guilty to? What's the recommendation?
Your Honor, as part of the global plea recommendation to resolve all state and federal charges, the state recommends and the defendant agrees in count 1, 20 years in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections with 5 years suspended and 15 years to serve, to be followed by 5 years of post-release supervision. In count 2, 15 years in the custody of the Mississippi Department of Corrections with 5 years suspended and 10 years to serve. Count 3, 5 years to serve. All counts will run concurrent to one another and concurrent to the sentences to be imposed for charges brought against the defendant by the United States government. The defendant will pay a $5,000 fine and a $1,000 assessment to the Crime Victims Compensation Fund. Further, the defendant will permanently surrender his law enforcement certificate.
What's the recommendation you expected to hear? Ms. Collins?
It is, Your Honor.
At this point, it's not too late to stop the hearing, but it will be if I accept your guilty plea. I want to make sure you want to plead guilty. If you want to plead guilty, do you have any questions? How do you plead count 1, aggravated assault, guilty or not guilty? And count 2, burglary or home invasion, how do you plead guilty or not guilty? Guilty. And count 3, conspiracy to commit hindering prosecution in the first degree, how do you plead guilty or not guilty? Here is if I could not accept it.
No, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Elwood, you understand that you're pleading by bill of information. You understand that? That means that this is, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, Your Honor. That means that this has not gone to the grand jury. You have an opportunity for this case to go to the grand jury and determine whether they would hand down a true bill of indictment or not. You understand that? Yes, Your Honor. And you are waiving that right and you are agreeing to proceed by bill of information. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Okay.
The 6 officers involved in the January abuse case of 2 black men in Rankin County appeared in court today to face state charges. 12 News' Tia McKenzie, she is live from the Rankin County Court with more on today's hearing. Tia?
The courtroom was packed to maximum capacity as those 6 officers pleaded guilty once again, this time to state charges. Brett McAlpin, Jeffrey Middleton, Christian Dedmon, Hunter Elwood, Daniel Opdyke, and Joshua Hartfield each entered the Rankin County Courthouse, wrists shackled to their waists in jail suits. Prosecutors today described the heinous acts that occurred during the raid on a Braxton home. The officers received word that black men were staying with a white woman there. The officers spoke with each other in code phrases such as work easy and no bag mugshots before raiding the home, beating and torturing Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker. Jenkins was shot in the mouth during the encounter. The 6 officers pleaded guilty to several federal charges earlier this month.
Came back
back inside, we observed MJ and EP covered in chocolate syrup and other liquids. Shortly after, MJ and EP were ordered to strip naked and shower off. Their handcuffs were removed. After MJ and EP showered off and changed into clean underwear and sweats, they were handcuffed again and brought to the side bedroom adjacent to the carport. The officers began discussing the comparative strength of their respective tasers, and they decided to test their tasers on MJ and EP to see which one was the most powerful.
You have to disagree with this factual basis, Mr. Bill. You have to disagree with what she said. The arrest we made against you is by use of force or intimidation. They caused you to change your plea from not guilty to guilty. Promises are hope for reward that made you in return you can change your plea from not guilty to guilty. After speaking to your attorney, you want to decide to plead guilty. Tell the court you're freely and voluntarily admitting your guilty crime you're pleading guilty to, and you plead guilty to the argument. You understand this court's not bound by any plea bargaining agreement to impose the maximum sentence here? You also understand if I accept your plea, you have no right to appeal.
Rankin County Sheriff Brian Bailey released a statement in part, I believe today's guilty pleas show the community that our system of checks and balances is effective. As for those 6 officers, they are expected to be sentenced in mid-November. Live in Rankin County, Tia McKenzie, 12 News.
Thank you so much, Tia. Well, Rankin County Sheriff Brian Bailey also included in his statement on today's court proceedings that, quote, the Rankin County Sheriff's Office continues to evaluate and modify its policies, procedures, and training for all Sheriff's Office employees. We have asked for assistance from outside agencies and contracted with outside firms to evaluate us, make recommendations, and conduct training.
Yeah, it should have never even got that far. Sheriff knew what was going on inside that.
A third former Mississippi
precinct.
officer has been sentenced to prison for torturing 2 black men last year. A judge sentenced Daniel Opdyke to 17 and a half years behind bars earlier today.
2 of the other members of the so-called Goon Squad received similar sentences yesterday for the racially motivated attack in which they broke into a home without a warrant and tortured the 2 men who were staying with a white woman. 3 more ex-officers are expected to be sentenced this week.
Our own CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett is following the story for us from Jackson, Mississippi. Errol, this is so bleak, so horrific. We understand that one of the victims had to walk out of court today. What was that about?
Hey there, Meg and Lana. That's right. It was another emotional day in this federal courthouse. Behind me, you're seeing the defense team for one of the officers who testified today, Daniel Opdyke. The judge ultimately sentencing him to 17 and a half years behind bars for his role as part of this so-called goon squad of police officers who were willing to use excessive force, in this case, an off-the-books, according to the government operation, in which they targeted Eddie Parker and Michael Jenkins because they got a tip that these black men were in the house of a white woman. That's it. The area this took place is predominantly white as far as Rankin County here in Mississippi. And we heard in testimony today from the government that these men wanted to intimidate the black men so they wouldn't come back to this side of the river. The Pearl River separates those 2 demographics in this part of the country. But what we also heard from Daniel Opdyke was an impassioned apology. He was tearful. He said he continues to have nightmares from what he did. He said he was a coward for not stepping up for these men. He said he hopes his sentence brings some sort of closure for the victims. But for Eddie Parker, who was just yesterday accepting the apology of Hunter Elwood, the first officer sentenced to 20 years, it was too much for him. He told me because his aunt, who was sitting next to him, was too emotional. They do not buy the tears. They do not accept the excuses because according to Eddie, the victim, each men took turns abusing them. The government also said that Mr. Opdyke took a kitchen instrument and inserted it into the men. So they were sexually abused, they were terrorized, they were assaulted. And for the community here, it's significant. They're seeing now a 3rd officer sentenced to an extensive prison sentence for his role. And as you mentioned, 3 other officers are to be sentenced as well.
It's really hard to listen to those details. Errol, the sheriff who was not involved in the torture is now facing calls to resign. How likely is that?
It's a great question, and outside the courthouse is what the legal team representing the 2 men continue to say. In fact, just yesterday I posed a question because Brian the sheriff of Rankin County, Brian Bailey, is still in his position, and he oversaw these men. Here's a question I asked to the gentleman's legal team yesterday about that.
The struggle for justice will always continue as long as Brian Bailey insists that he's going to remain the sheriff. But I'm sure that somebody's going to do something about it. I'm sure that the Rankin County supervisor.
And my question to them was, what do you say to people of color in this part of the country who wonder if they're safe? That remains a lingering question. They've filed a $400 million civil lawsuit against him and the county in order to get him to be removed. But Mr. Bailey's legal team says that lawsuit should be dismissed because as sheriff, he is not legally responsible for the actions of his officers. So that fight will continue to take place.
A third former Mississippi officer has been sentenced to prison for torture.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
All right.
Crazy.
This is a big week. This is a week that we have been waiting on for months.
It's crazy.
This sentencing was supposed to take place in November. It was supposed to take place in January.
That's right.
It has been continued and continued, and now the day of justice has finally come.
That's right.
For the Rankin County Goon Squad. It's an important day, not only in Mississippi, but this is an important day for accountability.
That's right.
For police brutality all throughout America. Police officers are watching this sentencing. They're watching the sentences that the Honorable Judge Lee will give out tomorrow. And they're watching to see whether law enforcement in Mississippi and law enforcement in America will be held sufficiently accountable for their acts of torture and brutality. On behalf of the victims of these horrific crimes, Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, as their attorneys, we are here to say that we are here advocating and seeking and desiring the maximum sentence for all 6 Rankin County Goon Squad defendants.
That's right.
We want the maximum sentence. What do we want?
Maximum sentence.
That's what we're here for. And so the defendants, Hunter Elwood, who will be sentenced tomorrow, he's the deputy that shot Michael Jenkins in the mouth. He will be sentenced tomorrow along with Mr. Middleton, and everyone else is coming up this week. Christian Dedman, Joshua Hartfield, Daniel Updike, and Brett McAlpin. These are serious federal charges that these defendants have pled guilty to. I don't know if you have them, but I have the information that they have pled guilty to. And it is sad and tragic information of which serious criminal penalties and consequences should be levied tomorrow. Hunter Elwood is facing a total for this crime of at least 70 years. He's facing at least 70 years for a variety of civil rights criminal violations. He faces up to 70 years for his shooting of Michael Jenkins and his criminal civil rights violations. And he also has pled guilty to a similar act against other victims in Rankin County. So tomorrow will be a great test of this justice system, because it will send a sign tomorrow of what will be happening with the rest of the 6 defendants. And the nation is watching, police officers are watching, the victims are watching, the families are watching, and they want justice.
Yes.
What do you all want?
Justice.
And when do you want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Justice.
And when do we want it?
Now.
Yeah.
Well, Troy, as of today, 4 of the 6 involved in those torture crimes have been sentenced, including Updike, the person who turned over the text messages from the Goon Squad group chat, along with Dedmon, who was identified in court today as the ringleader. 4th former Rankin County deputy who pleaded guilty to torturing Eddie Parker and Michael Jenkins was sentenced to 40 years in prison Wednesday as accounts of the horrific brutality of Goon Squad deputies afflicted the federal courtroom.
Let this be a strict warning to all rogue police officers in the United States of America that you will not get light sentences, that you will not be let off easy.
U.S. District Court Judge Tom Lee imposed the harshest sentence so far on ex-deputy Christian Dedmon, saying he committed the most shocking, brutal, and cruel acts imaginable. Details of the nightmare beatings, torture, and sexual assaults back in January of 2023 unfolded for a second day as the victims came face to face with their abusers. For the first time this week, Eddie Parker spoke before the judge, giving his impact statement at Dedmon's hearing.
Christian Dedmon, who Eddie described as the devil, and to see the devil get his due on this day, we just have to say all glory to God.
Despite his relatively young age, Dedmon, while on stand, claimed that he was only able to rise to this position because he participated in this behavior, saying it was encouraged by management.
The only way that Mr. Dedmon was promoted,
it was encouraged.
The only way that he
was
able to become an investigator at the age of 28 and have authority over other people was because he bought into the culture of violence.
Dedmon was also sentenced in the same proceeding of a crime related to a separate incident in December of 2022. Updike, the 3rd former deputy, received a 17-year prison term Wednesday. At his sentencing, Updike's attorney pointed to Dedmon as the, quote, guy who had this demented sexual perversion. 2 other deputies, Elward and Middleton, learned their fates on Tuesday. Elward, who shot Jenkins in the mouth, was sentenced to 20 years. Middleton was sentenced to 17 and a half.
I've lived in Mississippi 68 years, and I've never seen justice like this.
Melvin Jenkins, the father of one victim, thanked Judge Lee, saying that the sentence was unheard of in the state. The final 2 defendants, Hartfield and McAlpin, are set to be sentenced Thursday. In addition to their federal charges, the 6 defendants also face state charges for which they await sentencing.
Hey, man, this is real crazy that these officers felt that they were going to get away with this and that they could cover it up. I'm glad that they got arrested. I'm glad that they're suffering some consequence for it, but I feel that they should have got way lengthier sentences than that because they took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the law, and these are the people that us in the community look up to protect. They did get arrested, though. And I want y'all to leave a comment. Let me know what you feel about it, man. And share this video, to let people see what's going on. Like, this here shouldn't be swept under the rug. This should be publicized over and over for months to come. So hopefully something can be done in that area about it, because it's like it's been going on there forever. And when things happen, it's like it gets swept under the rug a little bit. And then when something else happens, it brings light. Then they sweep it back under the rug. But they not shutting that operation down. They still letting them function. But it's your boy DZ, man. Leave a comment, man. Let me know how you feel, man. And share this video, man. Hit that subscribe button, man. It's not about the setback. It's about the get back. Now.